Ably is real-time infrastructure for AI products and live experiences. Engineering teams at HubSpot, Intercom, and 1,500 plus companies use Ably for token streaming, connection recovery, hub sub messaging, delivery guarantees, and live chat, serving 2 billion plus devices a month with 100% uptime for 7+ years.
Welcome back to the New Stack Makers. I'm Frédéric Ladinois, the Senior Editor for AI at the New Stack.
Hey, and I'm Matt. I'm the Technical Co-founder and CEO of Ably.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being here, Matt.
Yeah, no, thank you for inviting me on.
For sure. Now, for those who don't know you and for those who don't know Ably just yet, I was thinking maybe give us a quick overview of maybe your career first, and then we'll talk about Ably and how Ably became the company it is today.
Sure. So I've been in the game what feels like a long time. I started as a web engineer back in the mid-90s.
Wow.
And been through quite a few businesses, mainly being sort of engineering or CTO. Ably is the first business that I've been the CEO, but we're a deeply technical business, and so it fits. Most of my engineering, as I said, has been in sort of web engineering, and then Ably is something completely different because we built a globally distributed platform for basically powering real-time experiences, and so. Under the hood, it's effectively a very big hub sub platform operating and literally trillions of transactions a month to billions of devices. And it's been a completely different journey for me because web engineering has been very much in the UX UI space, and this is very much systems engineering, distributed systems. And my co-founder is the person who brought all that knowledge, and it's been a wild journey doing things at this scale. So it's great.
What was it like making that transition, going from something that's more not necessarily consumer facing, but kind of more consumer facing, to something that's more like this, that's more infrastructure?
I found it. I mean, we spent 3 years getting the business to launch. But 3 years building the platform, which any business book will tell you that's a mistake. And the reason it took so long was because we were generally trying to solve some really hard problems. And so the transition was just mentally amazing. Like it felt like with web applications, it felt like CRUD. Everything was just CRUD. It was just another CRUD application with some complexity and another CRUD application with some application. And suddenly, like, it was a science project. It was how do you solve? And I'll be honest. My background was certainly, I don't have a sort of science or maths background, but the sort of mental challenges of how to solve these distributed systems problems. The thinking has been done. That was the interesting part. It's not like we were doing kind of a new concept. The hard part was actually making it operational and making it work. And that's really the hard part. And so I love it. I mean, I think I've done my time in sort of more the front end side of things. I mean, the interesting thing now is, of course, if you look at what we do, we built a distributed system platform. But what do? Well, we power applications that are delivering UX type applications. So we're still in the same space, but just on the other end of the sort of tech stack, I suppose.
Yeah, for sure. And while everything was a CRUD app, back then, these days, everything's an AI app too. Yeah. So that must have changed kind of how you're thinking about your business as well, and kind of the messages that pass across your infrastructure.
It has, and there's a bit of an interesting story here, actually, which is, a year and a half ago, when everything was sort of, it was, the momentum was there, everything was kind of moving towards AI. Huge business was accelerating, and the opportunity was clearly massive. And I think everyone internally, as well as investors and everyone else, were kind of expecting us to have an AI story. And I kind of felt a bit like I'm not jumping on that bandwagon, because that's not what we do. We're an infrastructure. I mean, we're not really an infrastructure business, but that is the core of what we do. That's how we can deliver the platform we offer. Like, we're a bunch of APIs for developers to build, these rich real-time experiences. But how do we do that? Well, by powering this, really complex infrastructure. And And so then we started to see that people were obviously using Ably to power some real-time capabilities for AI. So, again, we're like, well, we don't have an AI story as such. We just are some of the plumbing that people are using for their AI applications. And I'd say it's only really in the last 6 to 9 months that everything's changed. And I no longer feel like I'm jumping on the bandwagon. I'm like, oh, hold on a minute. We genuinely have something that is incredibly useful here. And I'd love to say we had the vision of where it was all going. Of course we didn't. What we were doing was we were building something that was for humans. So what do humans need? You need, when humans are communicating with each other, you need to have like reliable communication layer. You need to have presence. You need to potentially have some state. You need to deal with like maybe, us going away and coming back and making sure there's continuity. And so what's happened alongside this is agents, as we all know, have become more agentic, or whatever you want to describe. I mean, there's a bunch of different terminology, but in essence, they become long-running. Long-running means now you have to show that you're thinking and you're doing something. You have to have state. People are going away and coming back. Agents are going away and coming back. You're like, oh, hold on a minute. Like, this is what we've been building for humans to communicate, and agents are becoming more human-like. And the needs of agents are what to communicate with humans, which is their primary communication layer, is exactly what we've been building. So I'd love to say we had the vision and that's why we built it all, but it's not. We're just very well suited to solving this communication layer between agents and humans. So we do have an AI story now, but because we genuinely have some substance behind it.
Yeah, I think that's a story a lot of companies find themselves in these days right now, that, it turns out that their tooling actually works really well for this new world.
Yeah,
as well. So what's different now in this new world of it's AI, and especially AI agents?
I think what's really changed the most is that very quickly we've gone from short-running agents to long-running agents, and we mean by that is you send a request, does tool calls, and starts reasoning, and what that changes is that the likelihood of a connection dropping whilst it's doing that work is much higher. The likelihood of you wanting to interrupt that experience or steer the experience is much higher. And so HTTP as a transport becomes inadequate to solve that problem. And that's what's fundamentally changed. And that is why we've built Ably AI Transport, because it provides this durable session layer that means those problems are no longer problems anymore. And developers get back to building the AI experience rather than trying to build the plumbing around how the agents communicate with the end user. And all of these sort of niggling issues just go away. I will quote Intercom, because they adopted Ably because of these sorts of problems, and they have told us outright that their engineers now are focusing on the kinds of things they want them to focus on, as opposed to these UX type issues which surface with these longer running conversations.
Right. Is there a difference? Are there different primitives you have to build for those agents, or other architectural differences in how you're thinking about the platform now when agents become one of the main players on it?
Yes. The way we see it is that, the context of this really is that when you first started with agents, it was just request response. You send a request, you get a response back. So architecturally, no, there's no difference.
Right.
Send a request, get a response. Then there was the problems of, okay, well, now we need to stream responses. So it got a little different. You have to stream the tokens and make sure it's arrived in order and they're constructed and all those sort of things. What we found interesting is, we are fortunate enough that we talk to a lot of very AI forward or very large organizations, because they're our customers anyway. So I don't know, someone like HubSpot, and they tell us about the things they're doing with all their agents, and Intercom, people like that. And so we're kind of on the forefront of what they're doing, so we can see what they're doing, which is nice.
Right.
And what you see is that the larger companies, which I say larger, the more mature companies, the ones who are further down the AI journey, are thinking they've kind of solved the AI intelligence problem. And I don't mean they've solved it like it's the end of the road. They've solved it as in like, it's good now. Like, you ask it a question and it gives you a good answer back, or it does a good thing for you. It's a good co-pilot. It's no longer now. So now what's the next frontier? The next frontier for them is it's the user experience of those agents. And so when we start to think about all that, actually, yes, it does change a bit because token streaming is one of those things. We didn't really support, I mean, you could stream tokens over Ably before, but actually it needs a different primitive, which is, tokens are appending to a message. If you think of like a chat message, you see that chat message appending, getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Mm-hmm.
You don't really want, if you disconnect or reconnect, you don't want to resume and load thousands of tokens. That's ridiculous.
Right.
You just want to say, give me the state of that message and then continue from where you left off. So we've introduced some new primitives, like things like that, so that that are actually mutable, because we were previously immutable. Now we have mutability because we need support primitives. So on the whole, there have been some changes specifically for agents, but actually, the bulk of it is still the same. It's an agent talking to a human, and a human might change device, or the agent may crash and it needs to come back and continue from where it left off. The agent needs to know if the human's there. The human probably wants to know if the agent's there, so that's present. So the same primitives. You want to have replay and storage, so you need something durable so that it kind of can reload. And then something that's maybe a little newer, but it's not a new primitive for us, but a newer application of it is, HubSpot are doing this. They have agents that are your co-pilots, and what they do is they share state. So in a traditional sort of AI conversation, you would ask something to the agent, and let's say you're editing a spreadsheet. You would say, help me fill in the spreadsheet, and you would send your state to the agent in an ACV request with your spreadsheet state, and it would start processing stuff and then do some work and then send, I don't know, maybe an update back, say update the cell or do something like that. The problem with that model is that works if it's a request response, but that's not what happens today now. Now what happens is you ask it and say, help me with the spreadsheet. The agent probably needs to do 20 tool calls and some reasoning and spin up sub-agents. Now, by the time it's finished doing that work, you moved on. You're doing something else, right? And now the agent doesn't have your state. So now it's working with a view of what you were when you asked the question, not where you are now. And so interestingly, what HubSpot are using is a primitive called Live Objects, which is effectively a collaborative object storage. And the beauty of this is that the client can be updating things, and the agent at any point can just say, tell me what the state is right now. And it's always in sync. It's live in sync between those two devices. And so that's kind of new, I think. I mean, that sort of need for that. Again, I'd love to say we built that with that in mind. We didn't. We built it because collaborative object storage state between participants in a room is obviously what's needed, but now agents need it. So it's a different application of it, but it's very, very helpful. So I think there's a lot of similarities. At its core, you need reliable communication. That is like fundamentally why we built Ably. But at a high level, there are some, like token streaming and this collaborative state that are just a bit different. So we've made some changes. Yeah.
Interesting. The other, you kind of hinted at the durable sessions as well that are kind of core to the Ably platform as well. Maybe you can talk about that a little bit too, because I think when people think about PubSub, they sometimes also think like, okay, maybe I'll retry once or twice to make that connection and then give up. And, so your concept is a little bit different there, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's the word durable is it's a very popular word in the AI space now. I've got a post coming out about this shortly, but for the right reasons, right? Because again, going back to where's everything headed with agents is long-running conversations, long-running state, and so you need durability in all layers, right? You've got durable memory because you were like, I don't want my agent to be stupid. Like I wanted to know that I spoke with it a week ago and it knows about some of those things. You've got durable execution. I mean, Temporal are actually absolutely killing it. We're talking to them at the moment because there's a very similar story. But why did it exist? Because, suddenly it was like, you got a lot of steps, and if the agent crashes, I mean, it's mad that, I don't know if you've seen this, but people are talking about that, that the inference providers they don't even have 2 nines in their availability. Right? It's like,
definitely, some of them definitely don't. We know who we're talking about.
Yeah, it's insane, right? So this durable aspect is really important, and that's why durable execution is so important. That you can deal with these failures, and you just retry. It's idempotent, and you don't have to worry. And so they've, Temporal have absolutely killed it. They just rocketed because, like one of those same stories of right time, right place, but suddenly it's really relevant to these problems, and they're doing a great job. And so what we're seeing is that the developers that, what we've seen from our customers and people we've talked to in the space, we were at the AI engineer event last week, and a lot of people were talking about these problems, which is fine. So you've now got reliable agents, but now you've got this problem of how do you have reliable communication between the agent and the human when the agent goes away because it crashes, and then the human goes away because they change the device or something like that. Right. And so
hopefully
I'd like to make claim that we are the ones who be talking about durable sessions, but quite honestly, we're not. Durable sessions was originally first coined by EMQX, the MQTT provider, in the context of durable sessions as an MQTT session.
Yes.
And ElectricSQL doing some fantastic work. I don't know if you know them. They're a database provider, very small team, big voice. And they started talking about durable sessions in the context of AI. And quite frankly, I'm like, that is the right terminology. That is very good, and we're gonna use that terminology as well. So for us, durable sessions is, and by the way, they're not the only ones. There's durable transport and durable streams. A lot of providers are talking about durable streams. I think durable sessions is a better terminology because durable streams is just one layer of the stack, right? You do need durable streams, which is the token streams and messages and tool calls. But it's more than that. It's the present state, so that devices are online. It's the collaborative state, so you can share state. It's even things like device goes offline, send a push notification. It's still durable, right? You can come back later. This sort of cold, come back cold to the conversation. So it's I prefer calling it durable sessions than durable streams underplays what is needed from this layer. And I think the key thing here is that what we've seen is every developer, literally every developer we've spoken to said that, and we probably talked to, 50, 60 developers about this, not, in the context of them building these agentic applications, and they're quite far down the journey. And they all said the same thing. They started out on the intelligence layer. They worked with some framework, whatever framework, LangGraph, whatever it is.
Sure. Plenty of them for sure.
Yeah, and then they would build on that. And of course, what you're going to do, you're going to use HTTP because it's typical. You're building a server with a request response, and you use that, and then you start to stream responses over it, and then you start to kind of notice that there's all these other things you need to deal with, like what happens when the device goes away, what happens when the agent goes away, how do you stop and interrupt? So like Claude Code, this amazing experience of you can just say, by the way, which is the, what's it called, double texting. By the way, that's like another stream that runs alongside it. Or stop, or, stop what you're doing. Sorry, I was wrong. Let me interrupt. Or, or steer. Don't even tell it to stop. Just like, let me tell you something else while you're working on that thing. Those are very, very hard things to do over an HTTP transport because, you've got one request and one response, and you can't. It's not bidirectional. It's just you've said the request. So it's like everyone's run into the ground with the transport, not because it was the wrong transport. It is exactly what you need to get up and running. But now, everyone expects more because we're all engaging with, ChatGPT and Claude and they can invest tremendous amounts of money, and they haven't got all of this right. You've probably experienced it yourself that it loses the session. Sure. You reload the page, and it kind of like your stream breaks, and like these sorts of what we think of as like really straightforward problems. If you got the right layer in place, it's actually not easy problems to solve. So so there's definitely this emerging durable sessions layer that we didn't coin. There's the community is starting to talk about. And what's also really interesting is, if you look at someone like Vercel, TanStack, all of these sort of maybe newer agent frameworks that are thinking more about the end-to-end experience, they are building in transport plugin layers so that you can plug in a durable session layer. They all call it slightly different things, but it's not conceptually plug in your durable session layer because that's not a problem they want to solve because it's a hard problem to solve and someone needs to come and solve it, basically.
Right, that's your job.
Times. Yeah.
Well, how does that work just from a technical perspective? How do you keep those sessions durable, and kind of how is it possible for the agent to pick up later again then, or the human?
That's a good question. The way to be fair, everyone models it slightly differently. The way a traditional if I could take a step back and just maybe talk about how it works first and then how we do it. So, you
Sure.
would send the request and you don't have to worry about this durability because you send your request and you get your response back. And as long as you get your response back in time, then as in before a connection breaks or something happens, then it works. And often what people are doing is they're storing the state either server side, like in the agent.
Right.
And so each
That's what I would
request,
expect. Yeah.
it's just got some identifier, like a session identifier. And then actually, interestingly, if you look at someone like Vercel, their default model, which is a bit weird, but it works, is all the conversation states are stored in the client. So if you send a request and the server crashes, you just send the request again, and you've got the exact same state again, so you don't have to rely on state in the server and all of these sorts of problems. So that's the more traditional model. The way we approach it is that coupling for me is the problem, because really what should happen is a request comes in, a session starts. So I don't know if you like the terminology that is commonly used. You've got a session that starts and then you've got a turn, right? So your turn is I send a request and you kind of get through that turn of tool calls and responses and everything, that turn. So you have this turn layer that sits on top of the session layer. And the way we run it is that we have channels, which are part of the pub subsystem, topics, whatever terminology you use.
Yep.
Those for us are globally distributed and replicated across every region where it's active, where there's an active client. And we, have this sort of semantics of guaranteed ordering. So you've got this primitive that you can append indefinitely and guarantee that you get the state back. And so the way it works for us is that agents just need to know that they've got a session identifier, which maps to a channel, and then they can publish a message. And the beauty of this is they can also crash and just republish the same message with the same identifier. And because we've got a mutable message storage now, it means they can fail indefinitely with durable execution, and it'll still end up having one stream, one set of messages. Clients can disconnect and reconnect. And the interesting thing is what we found is it's not that people are changing devices. I mean, of course, if you're using Claude or ChatGPT, you're using one of the most probably commonly used things, fine, you go to might have an app. But actually what most people are doing is they're flicking between tabs. And they just expect the experience because you ask it something, takes a while, you go away. Now you need to come back 5 minutes later, you come back to a different tab and you expect everything to just be in sync. So the way that, the conceptual model for us is we've got these channels, which we've been operating for a very long time, very resilient. It's a very reliable primitive that provides this sort of storage layer. And by the way, we back everything with Cassandra. So that's our sort of underlying distributed storage layer. And so the idea is that, clients can at any point just rehydrate their state and get exactly what's happened on that session. Agents can go away and come back and just say, here's my new message. And if it has the same identifier, then they don't need to worry about what happened before. They don't need to worry if the client's connected. They don't need to worry about any of these things. They just operate independently, which is why PubSub was designed, right? I mean, it's the model, right? These two things should not need to exist. So they shouldn't be coupled. They shouldn't be so tightly coupled. And that's what's happened, right? And I don't blame people for designing that pattern. I think it was the right thing to get up and running, but the cracks are showing basically right now.
Yeah. Which is also true for a lot of the infrastructure we're dealing with now, that these demands are happening here. One thing we've talked about a lot is kind of the agent, the AI talking to the humans. What about AIs talking to other AIs, agents talking to agents? We've seen kind of, the beginning of some protocols emerging there, but how do you think about that? Or is that something that isn't necessarily what you want to focus on?
So we've drawn the line, not because we don't think it's a big problem, but we're trying to focus on things that involve the human, because that's our technology has been built for that problem. And I think it's a big problem, big enough space to go after. But I'll still give you my thoughts on this. So, obviously there's the agent-to-agent protocols that are emerging and backed by, a consortium of all the big players. And so that is emerging. Now, that is mainly about, at least my understanding, I'm not deep in this, it's the orchestration of agents communicating with them. Like, one agent spins up another agent, then has some way of communicating with and managing that. And it's kind of part of the orchestration there. What we see, so we don't get that involved in that because that is like where we sit. If you think of the architecture, it's when the agent needs to do something outside of the network, communicating to a human or something like that, or an agent even in another network, or but then yes, we get involved. But anything where it's like inside your network, well, there's kind of predefined protocols. It's more like RPC, like it's it's that sort of layer. But I think the thing that's interesting for us is two things. One is we see what we do use, Ably's AI Transport, which is our product in the space. This is our AI Transport is the durable session layer. Is that you actually do need agent coordination occasionally. And what I mean by that is multiple agents working on the same thing. So if you have Claude Code, for example, where you now say, by the way, please go and do this, which is the double texting, that's what's more generally called. One model, which is very complex, is now your agent has to think, okay, I need to spin up. I was doing a job, but now I need to also manage another agent doing something. And you kind of you're basically dealing with multi-threading, right? Our answer to this is don't do that. Just literally spin up a separate agent. It's another agent that runs independently. That because you've decoupled the transport layer, the session layer, it can just communicate onto that session layer when it's ready. And so it doesn't need to know about the other agent. But there are situations where it needs to know if the other agent maybe is in the middle of doing something. If it's a conversation, like an audio conversation, of course, it's not going to talk over the other person. So it's not about coordinating between each other in terms of instructions. It's about coordinating. It's about being respectful between agents. So that's one thing that's interesting. And I think the other one, which is not really in my wheelhouse, but I just think amazing, is, there's this idea now of, well, agents are going to need to probably talk to, like we have a sales team who will go and speak to someone, reach out to someone and say, hey, we can help solve this problem. Well, really, that's obviously started to become more agent-driven. And then you're going to think on the other end, instead of a human receiving that feedback, you're probably going to have an agent receiving that going, oh, let me listen. These two agents are going to be talking, but they're not connected. They're not using an agent-to-agent protocol. They're almost communicating through human layers, not agent layers. And I think when that happens, that's something we could definitely get interested in. So, facilitate with, because that's outside the network. It's communication layers. But it isn't something we're doing now. It's more, that's like, oh, that's where it's going, and it's fascinating.
Got it. Final question, maybe just for the engineer who wants to start adopting this, just maybe try PubSub or just using the REST APIs or something like that to get started. Like so many of us, what would it be like to get started with Ably on this?
So I've been really trying to. The one thing I've been pushing very, very hard for is last year, as I say, I literally spoke to maybe 40 engineers about their stack, how they were doing things. It was when we started to go, hold on, we do have a problem here we could solve. I'm not going to do the usual respond to the customers we have because that's skewed because they already use Ably. So then we're designing a product for people. I want to go speak to people who aren't using Ably. So I went and spoke to like some very AI forward company. And the core premise for me was you're building with ACTP and everyone's doing this. And when you want to mature to something where you introduce durable session layer, you shouldn't need to change your stack. You shouldn't need to change your design patterns. You shouldn't need to change your thinking. You should just be able to, the magic drop-in layer that you can do. And so to answer your question, that is how we've designed it. We're on iteration 2 already in 2 months, and iteration 2 is quite significantly different from iteration 1 because iteration 1 didn't go far enough on that idea of you should be able to drop it in an hour. I'm going to say an hour. I think less than that, but let me just not be ridiculous. In an hour, and you should be able to roll it out into development and test it, and it should be working. And that is absolutely the layer because, what we've said is the client still communicates to the agent over ACTP. So we don't get involved in that because we think that you're changing your architecture. That agent still does what it does, but now instead of replying back to the client over ACTP, instead it just says ACTP, I've received your request. Wait for the answer on this session, and then both things is communicated. So architecturally, it doesn't change anything, but I mean, of course it changes things, but it doesn't fundamentally change anything. And you'll see, because we've actually got a Vercel plugin for the AI SDK there, which is probably the most drop-inable, because they've got a transport layer where it is literally just a few lines of code, and suddenly the AI SDK that they provide does all of these things properly, right? So now I've used the AI SDK, it's not multi-device, it doesn't resume properly, you have to put your own storage layer in, it doesn't support barge in or stop, and you just drop it in and boom, all the stuff just works, right? So that's the dream. And for us, you mentioned PubSub, and I do want to just flag this, that I feel strongly that people should not have to think about PubSub. They shouldn't have, they should work in the idioms that they are working in AI, which is, I have a turn, I have a session, and I push stuff to the client. And we're trying to design it around that thinking. So we have an SDK that is our transport SDK that you just drop in and just magically, as much as possible, things work. And we're getting there. It's definitely, we've managed to achieve that, but we're moving quickly. Yeah,
it's true for the whole industry right now. Everybody's trying to move as quickly as we're trying to solve all of these new problems. But Matt, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it.
Excellent. Well, thank you for having me on. It's exciting times.
For sure.